Sigma sent me over their brand new 500mm 5.6 that comes in not only lighter, but also cheaper than the other notable competition. In this review, we'll take a look at all the perks of this lens compared to the competition, but also ask the question, does it stack up? Starting off, normally build quality isn't one of the first things that I touch on because it's not as significant. But I think one of the selling points of this lens is its extremely unique weight for a lens spec'd like this one. This lens comes in at only 1,370 grams, which, to give context, is 2.5 times less weight than the older Sigma 500mm 4.0 for DSLR. Compare this lens to the recent Sony 300mm 2.8 that recently released, and it's still lighter. Compare it to the Olympus 300mm 4.0 Prime, and it weighs virtually identical, and the list goes on. This lens is made to be portable at an incredible full frame focal length and is truly one of a kind. Now, this may not matter to some, and to be honest, I don't often care too much about the weight of my lens, but I know that I have a large following of people constantly talking about how much they like lightweight gear, and a bunch of MFT shooters that stick to MFT largely for this specific reason. All these weight achievements are also made without sacrificing build quality, in my opinion, and they still seem to achieve that standard Sigma rock solid sort of build without the weight. What this lens reminds me of most is the old Nikon 500mm 5.6, just slightly lighter and slightly cheaper. On other aspects of build, this lens foot is great with the built-in mounting and deeper build. This lens collar is also great, and the same as all the other recent Sigma telephotos you've seen in my reviews. And the aperture ring is great as well. As opposed to the recent Sigma 70 to 200mm 2.8 that I reviewed, I like the placement of this aperture ring a lot more, and it doesn't accidentally get in the way when I'm shooting wildlife photography, due to its placement further up on the lens, and due to the fact that the focus ring and aperture ring are very different sizes and textures for you to grip. So we've started off strong. But the image stabilization of this lens threw me for a little bit of a loop, if I'm honest. I really liked it in some scenarios. However, in others, it was just a little bit frustrating. The stabilization on this lens is so stinking good when you're relatively stable holding the lens. For example, you can see clips like this one shared here on screen, in which I'm in a comfortable position sitting on the ground, and the lens completely takes care of stabilizing the video to the point of it seeming like it's on a tripod. I mean, if you were to ask me whether or not this sequence was shot on a tripod or not, without knowing, I might actually say yes, that's how good it is. However, when you start to move out of scenarios where your elbows are able to be propped up or tucked into your body for extra support, you start to notice the roboticness of the image stabilization. It's almost as if the lens freezes the frame, then makes moves to adjust, freezes, moves, and so on and so forth. This means that as long as you're relatively stable, the lens can work wonders with the micro jitters of holding a camera handheld. However, when you're in a rush or panning with a bird in flight, it gives a little bit of jerky movements as it tries to stabilize. This was tested across image stabilization modes 1 and 2 on this lens with relatively similar results. I arrive at this conclusion. For photo, the image stabilization is actually quite phenomenal. This freeze frame style of stabilization makes it to where you will almost always get a clearly stabilized frame in a burst of photos. However, for video, the image stabilization is fantastic if you can get some good elbow support, but only if. When you can't achieve good elbow support or stabilization with your arms, just know that you'll be getting some jerking movements in your shots. Autofocus works great on this lens and seems to work lightning quick to me. The manual focus ring is nice and buttery smooth, and it has a wide textured grip, so it's very easy to access. Before I show you guys more about the glass quality and sharpness of this lens, I want to quickly tell you guys about my brand new newsletter I just launched, in which you'll actually be able to download all these Sharpness test files. Recently, I just rebranded my side channel to Wilder, and along with it, launched my very first newsletter ever. On this newsletter, you'll get access to the latest wildlife photography news on creators and gear, and you'll receive a monthly gear discount deal exclusively available to my newsletter subscribers. I'll also be giving away things for free on there occasionally, like my recent in the field cheat sheet I just made for you to take out and about with you on the field, and I'll even be giving away some free entries into this year's annual live wildlife photography competition that I host for over $5,000 worth of prizes. If any of this interests you, I'd be honored if you subscribe to the newsletter that I just created through the link in the description below. And if you do so through this specific link, you'll get immediate access to be able to download these Sigma 500mm 5.6 sharpness test files that I'm about to show, so that you can blow them up on the big screen, pick out all the details yourself rather than having to see it through the compressed quality here on YouTube. So let's take a look at the sharpness now. I think you'll find yourself impressed by just how sharp this lens is at the price point. I guess that I expected this 500mm lens to be slightly soft due to the cheaper price that it comes in at, as opposed to all the competition. But it truly was incredibly sharp. Corner to corner, this lens was sharp enough to make use of a high megapixel sensor and undoubtedly beats out the competition of any super telephoto zoom lens that I've ever tested, including Sigma's own 150-600 Sport, 60-600 Sport, alongside Panasonic's plethora of zoom lens options that I've tested, and compared to OM Systems' 150-400mm 4.5 that's so raved about. Compared to other super telephoto primes, it really seems to be on par with all other good ones I've seen and used. And I can't personally really tell the difference between this one and, let's say, the Nikon 500mm 5.6, for example. Both are very sharp and more than capable. Someone asked me in a comment previously if I'll be comparing this lens to the TT Artisan's 500mm lens that recently released, and I won't be in a side-by-side comparison. But let me tell you, I've used both, and this lens is undoubtedly way sharper than that lens. That lens may be the softest lens that I've ever tested, and honestly, not a really good purchase unless you're absolutely trying for the lowest possible budget you can fathom. Although in that case, I'd recommend just going for a cheaper MFT setup that will not only perform better, it'll also be sharper. From my use cases so far with this lens, I've experienced no serious fringing while out in the field and no other noticeable problems with glass quality. Sigma did claim to work hard on making this lens capable in very backlit scenarios to prevent flaring and ghosting, and I have to say that I actually did notice this feature out in the field even before I knew about it in a briefing. I've never done a scientific test about any of this, so I can't say it for sure, but it was interesting to note that I did notice this about the lens even before reading it out in any briefing like I mentioned. Again, just as a reminder, I'll be linking all the sharpness test files along with a few other in-the-field photos shot with this lens in the description below. So make sure to head over there and check them out for yourself. So who is this lens for? Well, to me, this lens is about the most straightforward, capable, yet standard lens that there is for the common wildlife photographer. It's pretty much exactly what it claims to be, isn't much more, and isn't any less. It's not a disappointment in glass quality, yet not over the top impressive in low light. Its depth of field is good, but not $10,000 worth of good, hence the price point. It's light and compact enough for anyone to carry around, and standard enough in its focal reach so that most anyone will be able to use it for their typical use case as a wildlife photographer. Really, it doesn't get much more standard of a build than this lens. And I can't say that I'm disappointed about it in any way beyond the stabilization issues that I was having in moving video. For the price, it seems like a great deal to me. I mean, it's the same price as the Olympus 300mm f4, for example, and I would take this lens over that one. If you're an L-mount shooter, this is really your only good prime super telephoto option at the moment, and ultimately, whether you're on Sony's E-mount or L-mount that this comes in, I think that this lens comes down to a personal decision and whether or not you want your standard run-of-the-mill wildlife photography lens. If you need something hyper-specialized, this may not be the perfect match. If you want something that has the flexibility of a wider focal length, this lens will not be the perfect match. And if you're simply looking for the best of the best possible super telephoto lenses, go out and spend 2 to 5 times the amount on a high-end Sony Super Telephoto Prime instead of spending your money on this one that won't quite be able to match it. If you want to get almost all of the way there, to match the biggest names in super telephoto primes, but do it on a substantially cost-effective budget, or if you want a really light full-frame super telephoto prime for mobility and hiking, then this is the lens that you're looking for. If you want to see more reviews like this, or my video releasing later this month with my time out in the field doing bird photography with this lens and hiking around with it, I'd be honored if you subscribed to the channel below and turned on notifications. I'll see you guys next time.